Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell, and we are bored of it. And welcome to our review of Circadians First Light. If you haven't encountered this game before, it's a resource management dice worker placement game for 1 to 4 players. And it's designed by Sam MacDonald, who you might be familiar with for his work with Shem Phillips on the West Kingdom series.
Now, Circadians First Light is the first game in the Circadians universe of board games, and it sees you discovering an alien planet full of intelligent life forms. Your goal is to find out what you can, to negotiate and trade with them, to gather supplies so you can survive, to collect biological samples, and so on. We should say, before we get into the overview and review, that we were kindly provided this copy of the game by the designer.
One of the first and most important actions you'll take in First Light is to pick a hero. Heroes provide game-breaking bonuses, and leaning into their power is the first step to victory. Then you'll get into the game proper, playing 7 rounds of dice worker placement. Each round will begin with the revealing of an event card, which either tend to be positive, e.g. don't pay to go to this particular space this round, or negative, pay extra to go to this particular space this round. They're typically a little bit more interesting than that, but just as a basic example. Then you'll roll your dice pool, and then behind your own personal screen so that other players can't see, you'll assign those dice to the various locations on your player board. Assigning them to the hangers means that you'll get to send those dice out to the shared worker placement spaces, and assigning them to your farms means that you'll generate resources at the end of the round.
Once assigned, you will reveal your dice and then take turns sending them out one by one to one of the sections. What's important to know is that the dice have to be sent out left to right, which means that you really do have to plan ahead. Now, going through the different sections, you have the foundry where you can get new ships for your hangar, and this may allow you to manipulate the dice when you send them out. Then you have the laboratory where you could gain new farms, which will provide you with resources when you place dice there. You have the control room, which will move your harvester on this main board, and at the end of a round you'll gain resources based on where the harvester is. The academy lets you get new dice. The mining camp provides gems, which are a valuable resource, very hard to get any other way. And then you lastly have the market, which is where you can trade resources for resources. One kind of fascinating element of the game is that the number on the dice will affect the action. Sometimes it might change what resource you have to pay to take that action. Another time, such as with the harvester, it may change what direction that harvester moves in.
There are 2 further areas of importance, and these are the main ways that you're going to score victory points. You can negotiate, where you're going to exchange resources for victory points and bonuses, or you can visit the depository to fulfill a contract, and fulfilled contracts are also worth points. Fulfilled contracts also typically unlock some kind of a special power that you can use for the remainder of the game, or they provide endgame scoring. So essentially, you're going to be sending your dice out round after round, collecting resources, spending them in the various ways, all the while upgrading your engine. At the end of the 7th round, your score for contracts, the negotiation board, your hangar and farm tiles, and any leftover gems. And the person with the most victory points is indeed the winner. Circadians First Light is a real treat. It's robust and crunchy, and surprisingly dynamic given how simplistic the actions are. A key highlight is the different routes to victory, resulting in some really tense matchups where other players are dominating in areas that you haven't ventured into that game, creating an air of mystery about how you're really doing and how you compare.
And one of the great things about these different routes to victory is that you're enticed to explore them through the excellent leader cards, because at the beginning of the game you'll pick a leader which will have this game-breaking power, and you want to make the most of it, so you're going to go down a route, probably a different route than the other players, and you'll kind of get to deep dive into that and experience different aspects of the game. Now, for the most part, the leaders are interesting, and it's generally a tough decision about which one to pick at the beginning of the game. But unfortunately, there are some leaders which are clearly better than others. You'll have some leaders which will have an average power that will activate in very specific occasions, maybe never, depending how you play. And then you'll have other leaders which have really sick powers that activate every single round. And you do get a choice of 3 leaders. Well, you pick one from a choice of 3 leaders at the beginning of the game. So it's not that much of an issue, but it is a shame that there's leaders in this game which we would never want to play with.
One terrific aspect of First Light is how incredibly timed the pace of the game is. When you start out with just 3 dice, one of which you'll likely need to be assigning to harvest resources, the 7 rounds will go by in no time. But you'll actually find that the game ends in perfect time, just as you've ramped up your engine and then had it pay off. Going back to those 3 dice that you start with, a particularly interesting mechanism is that the 2 main ways to score require you to spend a dice out of your pool permanently. Thus, you're having to constantly juggle your dice pool, and it's a tough decision about when to add more dice to your pool versus when to spend them for the scoring.
And that's not the only dice dilemma, because it's also a very tough decision about when to spend dice to send them out to take actions, or when to send them to your farms to gain resources. Because you want to do as many actions as possible due to the game being over in 7 rounds and moving quite quickly. You always feel as though time's against you, but the actions tend to cost a lot of resources, so you need to generate those resources. And this kind of push-pull of wanting to do as much as possible versus generating the resources you need is a cornerstone of First Light and a particularly engaging puzzle.
Another fun puzzle that comes via the dice is making the values that you roll work for you and the actions that you want to take. And this is because the numbers directly impact how the actions work or what type of resource you need to pay. So it does force you to live on the edge a little bit there, as there aren't really too many options to manipulate the values. Arguably, this could be one aspect that will put people off First Light, as it does take some of the control away from the player, and a bad roll could significantly impact your round or future rounds, but it's not something that we personally minded.
While we're talking about the dice, it's worth mentioning the dice screen. Because in this game, when you roll your dice, you're going to roll them behind the dice screen, and then you're going to assign them however you want, and then reveal. Now, well, some people will probably quite like this. We didn't really find that it added anything to the game. Like, I don't really care how many dice Tally is putting in her farms or sending out, because I can't really do anything about it, and turn order is a big factor as well. And the only way I could really predict where she's going to go is if she has 2 dice next to each other, which means she's probably going to grab a farm, but not always. So it's not a negative, it doesn't detract from the game in any way. Just personally found it to be a bit of extra faff. The last thing we want to mention is the excellent push-pull between contracts and negotiations in terms of the big ways to score. Contracts will score you less, but they will often give you in-game bonuses which are rather powerful, such as making actions cheaper, so you have a better chance of accumulating points in the future, and some of them will also give you conditions for in-game scoring. Whereas negotiations will see you trade a lot of resources for a lot of points, but have rather tame, not super helpful bonuses. And I've played this a number of times now, and each time I've kind of gone for a different strategy, and the game has felt fairly different, which speaks well to the replayability. And I think people will have a lot of fun exploring the different ways in which you can go about this game to win. And I think, from my experience, having won in different ways, they're all equal and equally fun to explore. Final thoughts: Circadians First Light is a game we've thoroughly enjoyed our time with, and is one we completely recommend. Now, it's not one of our favourite games ever, it's not a must-own, but if you've been interested by what we've said, if the mechanisms sound like your thing, or if you like previous games from the designer, then it's definitely something that I think will be a hit for you.
Yep, and it has some wonderfully crunchy and dynamic gameplay. It's filled to the brim with interesting decisions. And it also has some bitey player-to-player moments as you fight over the limited worker placement spaces. If you're looking for something heavier and more epic, check out our review of Chaos Order, which is the second game in this series.
And one of my top 10 games of last year.
Yes, it was, wasn't it? If you enjoyed this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel if you're not already, and please feel free to ask us anything about the game in the comments down below, or let us know if you've played First Light and what you think of it. And we're off to bribe the dogs with some more treats, I think. They're not so cooperative this evening, are you?
Yeah, they're good. See you next time.
Bye.